Picture this: no roof, no door, no lock, not even shoes on your feet. Somewhere in the dark, about 40 paces away, something carrying claws as long as kitchen knives is quietly deciding whether you look like dinner. That was simply Tuesday for every member of our ancestral line before roughly 12,000 years ago. Back then, our kind sat nowhere near the top of the food chain. Instead, they occupied a much humbler position on the menu, filed somewhere between wild goat and… why not? It's right there. And yet, here we are now, billions of us, walking around as if that was never in question. Somehow, against every reasonable expectation, our forebears were not eaten into extinction. They held on. They multiplied. They pushed through an almost unthinkable span of time being soft, slow, thin-skinned. And they were dropped into a landscape, crawling with animals that seemed engineered, with almost suspicious precision, to end them. How did that actually happen? That's the question worth sitting with, because the real answer is far stranger and far more impressive than the usual mental image of a rugged caveman casually wrestling a big cat for sport. It was never one clever trick. It was a long chain of small adaptations, habits, and discoveries, stacked one on top of the other. A stretch of time almost too long to picture properly. So let's actually walk through how it happened. Start by being honest about the starting conditions, because they were genuinely brutal. Go back nearly 3 million years to the earliest members of our genus. Small-bodied, fragile brains still a fraction of what they would become. No fire, no real tools to speak of, no spoken language, no coordinated hunting plan of any kind. Biologically, that creature was prey. Not a predator, not anything resembling an apex species. Just something larger animals chased down and ate when the opportunity arose. And the predators sharing that landscape were not gentler, smaller versions of what roams the savanna today. They were considerably worse. There was a hyena-like carnivore, built like a small lion. Its bite was powerful enough to crack open the leg bone of a full-grown elephant, the way you'd snap a breadstick. Not as a figure of speech, as a literal, documented fact. There were several lineages of long-fanged cats, the largest carrying canine teeth close to a forearm's length. There were river predators that made today's crocodiles look like house pets. Short-faced bears stood 3 meters tall on their hind legs and weighed close to a small car. There was even an enormous raptor, a true bird of prey, capable of taking down something roughly human-sized. Its talons rivaled the claws of a modern big cat. None of this was exaggerated folklore. These were efficient, fully evolved killing machines. And our ancestors lived right alongside them, often clustered near rivers and watering holes, which, inconveniently, is also exactly where every predator on the continent chose to wait. Because every predator had already worked out the same simple equation: stay near the water, and the food eventually walks up to you. Early humans were, in effect, wandering into the same ambush point on a daily basis. So how does a species that vulnerable avoid being wiped out in its first 100,000 years? It starts with something almost embarrassingly simple. They refused to be alone. Group living is one of the oldest survival strategies in the animal kingdom, and our ancestors leaned into it completely. Think about it from the hunter's side of the equation. A big cat scanning the grassland at dusk spots a single figure crouched alone at the water's edge. An easy, low-risk meal. That same cat spots a tight cluster of 24 individuals, several already on their feet, shouting, throwing stones, banging sticks together, advancing as one unit. And suddenly, the math changes entirely. This is what biologists call the dilution effect, and it is not sentiment. It's arithmetic. Inside a group, the odds of any one individual being singled out drop sharply with every extra body nearby. You don't need to outrun the predator. You don't need to overpower it. You only need to avoid being the unlucky one out of 25. And the crowd itself hands you those better odds for free. It went further than passive safety in numbers, though. There's strong evidence, reinforced by what we observe in our closest living relatives today, that early human groups actively confronted threats together rather than simply huddling and hoping. Not single combat, which would have been close to suicidal, but coordinated group resistance, noise, thrown objects, banging, a unified advance that made the predator's risk calculation collapse. And here's the part most people underestimate. Large predators are, as a rule, deeply averse to unnecessary risk. A big cat that takes a rock to the face or a spear graze across the shoulder may be unable to hunt cleanly for weeks afterward. And an apex predator that can't hunt effectively is an apex predator on a short path to starvation. Their margin for injury is razor thin. So anything that meaningfully raises the cost of an attack tends to be enough to send it looking elsewhere for an easier meal. Nobody sat down and planned this strategically at first. It emerged the same way most early survival behavior did, through brutal trial and error. Groups that stood together tended to live long enough to raise the next generation. Groups that scattered usually didn't get the chance to pass anything on at all. Every single one of us alive today descends from a group that chose to stand its ground. If that thought gives you chills, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have stood and fought or run? Then came the discovery that changed the entire equation permanently. Fire. It's easy to hear that fact and nod along without really absorbing how seismic it was. So it's worth sitting with the biology for a moment. Nearly every large land predator carries an instinctive, deeply wired fear of fire. Not learned behavior, but something baked in by an evolutionary history full of uncontrollable wildfires they had no ability to predict or resist. To a predator, fire reads as pure, ungovernable danger, and the instinctive response to encountering it is retreat, not curiosity. Once our ancestors worked out how to keep a flame alive through the night, they had built something no claw or fang could simply push through. An invisible boundary almost nothing was willing to cross. Picture a big cat stalking a sleeping camp in the dark. It feels heat radiating from 40 paces out. It sees light that strips away the darkness it depends on to approach unseen. Meaning everyone near that fire can now spot it coming from 100 paces away instead of being caught by surprise. It catches the smell of smoke, and something ancient and wordless in its brain says, "Turn around." And it does. Night, historically the deadliest stretch of every 24 hours, became something that could finally be survived. Sleep, once a state of total helplessness, became manageable instead. People rotated watches, someone always tending the flame, someone always watching the dark beyond its reach. Fire did even more than that. Smoke drove off disease-carrying insects that had quietly killed far more of our ancestors than any cat ever managed directly. Cooking neutralized parasites and bacteria that caused widespread illness. Heat-hardened spear tips became meaningfully more lethal. Entire colder regions, previously left to predators built for the climate, opened up as livable territory. Fire didn't just provide a shield. It fundamentally rewrote the relationship between our ancestors and the rest of the natural world. Before fire, the world simply happened to them. After fire, they started happening to the world. Sleep itself deserves a closer look, because it's a genuinely strange vulnerability when you think about it directly. Roughly a third of every life spent fully unconscious, senses dulled to almost nothing, completely unable to flee or fight. For a creature without walls, surrounded by nocturnal hunters, that should be a fatal design flaw. For a long stretch of prehistory, the workaround was simply height. Before fire could be reliably maintained, our ancestors likely slept the way many primates still do, building rough nests well off the ground, high enough that ground-based predators couldn't easily follow. The skeletal evidence backs this up. Shoulder and arm anatomy from early members of our lineage shows retained climbing strength. Long after the feet had already fully adapted for walking upright. Evolution doesn't bother preserving an expensive trait unless it's still earning its keep. Trees weren't a perfect solution. Some climbing predators followed prey up into the branches regardless. The fossil record includes ancient kill sites confirming exactly that. But getting off the ground still narrowed the list of credible threats from nearly everything on the plain down to the handful of animals that could actually climb. And that narrowing mattered enormously. Caves offered a different, messier trade-off. A single direction to defend instead of an open horizon, shelter from weather, but also, inconveniently, prime real estate that large carnivores already considered home. Moving into a cave often meant moving into someone else's den. And the archaeological record shows humans and big predators trading occupancy of the same shelters back and forth across thousands of years. An uneasy, generations-long timeshare neither side had agreed to. The development that mattered most, though, wasn't physical at all. It was language, complex, abstract, capable of describing things not physically present, capable of warning about a future that hadn't happened yet. Compressing a dangerous encounter into something that could be handed to someone who never had to live through it firsthand. Without language, every individual has to personally survive a danger to learn from it. A young member of the group who has never encountered a particular predator usually only gets one chance to find out the hard way. Often a fatal one. With language, a single encounter becomes shareable. Someone describes exactly what they saw, the tracks, the markings, the direction to avoid. And that warning spreads through an entire group, then to neighboring groups, then forward across generations. To children who will recognize a danger they never personally faced because someone, long before they were born, took the trouble to put it into words. Knowledge stopped dying with the individual who first survived it. It compounded instead, generation after generation, until a single community understood the dangers of its territory more completely than any one predator could ever understand them. Claws and speed and raw strength stayed exactly as fixed as they had always been. Accumulated knowledge kept growing without limit. Over enough time, that was never going to remain a close contest. Eventually came the spear, and with it, the moment our ancestors stopped being purely defensive and started becoming genuinely dangerous in their own right. The earliest known examples, expertly weighted, balanced, and shaped for throwing rather than stabbing, date back roughly 350,000 years. The product of people who understood projectile motion intuitively without a single word of formal physics behind them. The real shift wasn't the object itself, but what it changed about the basic transaction between hunter and hunted. Before a reliable thrown weapon, hurting a large predator required getting close enough that it could just as easily hurt you back. An exchange the slower, weaker, less armored species usually lost. A spear thrown true broke that equation completely. Damage could now be delivered from 20, 30, 40 paces away. A group could surround a threat from multiple angles at once. And predators, which are far better at learning from experience than old folklore gives them credit for, began remembering. An animal that took a spear wound once didn't need a second lesson to recognize that this particular prey fought back. Across enough encounters and enough generations, the populations that repeatedly ran into armed, organized groups began actively avoiding them. And the fear that had once flowed in only one direction slowly, steadily, started flowing the other way instead. There's also a quieter advantage our ancestors carried the whole time, one that rarely gets enough credit: stamina. As sprinters, they were thoroughly unimpressive, nowhere close to a big cat's burst of speed. But ask any of those same predators to maintain even a moderate pace under direct sun for several hours straight, and the attempt fails badly. Their bodies simply overheat long before their legs give out. Humans, almost uniquely among large mammals, sweat across nearly their entire skin instead of relying on panting to cool down, which means they can run and regulate their temperature at the same time, mile after mile, on a frame built for distance rather than speed. Combined with an upright stride that's remarkably efficient at a steady pace, this turned into a genuine fallback option unavailable to almost any other prey animal on the landscape. Simply keep moving, knowing the thing chasing you would fail from heat long before exhaustion ever caught up with you. By somewhere around 50,000 years ago, all of these threads had braided into something genuinely new. Fully developed language, layered social structures, abstract symbolic thought, and clear evidence of long-range planning. People were marking cave walls not as decoration, but as a record, passing down knowledge about migrations, dangers, and safe routes. They were crafting bone needles, twisted cordage, fish hooks, and traps. All of it requiring the ability to imagine a future need and prepare for it days or weeks ahead of time. Hunts became coordinated at a scale no other species on the landscape could match. Entire herds driven over cliff edges using fire and noise timed with real precision, territories deliberately cleared. And increasingly, the very predators that had once hunted humans became targets in their own right. Hunted with what looks unmistakably like intent rather than mere self-defense. The remains show processed bone, used hides, and signs of ceremonial treatment, suggesting the act of killing these animals had taken on real cultural weight. It was, in effect, a quiet but unmistakable declaration: we are no longer prey. There's a heavier truth sitting underneath all of this, one worth not glossing over. The same chain of adaptations that let our ancestors stop being eaten is also, unavoidably, the story of what eventually happened to the animals that once hunted them. One by one, across nearly every continent, within a relatively narrow window after fully modern humans arrived, the largest and most formidable species vanished. The great elephant-boned hyenas, the long-fanged cats, the giant short-faced bears, the massive flightless megafauna, the huge raptors. Gone almost everywhere, people eventually settled. Climate shifts undoubtedly played some role. But the one variable present in every single region right before the disappearances was us. Animals that had dominated their ecosystems for millions of years, that had outlasted ice ages and volcanic winters, simply could not outlast a species armed with language. Fire. The spear. Accumulated knowledge passed down without limit. And the unsettling ability to learn faster than evolution could ever keep pace with. We were never the biggest. We were never the fastest. We were never the strongest. We simply, quietly, and almost without anyone noticing until it was already finished, became the most dangerous thing that had ever walked into that landscape. And everything that had once hunted us learned that truth far too late to do anything about it. Every single person watching this right now is living proof that they made it. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments which part of this journey hit you the hardest. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.